It's a new year and we get a new title sequence. It feels rather odd to see Pertwee in the diamond opening titles, and the full body shot of him is a bit weird. Still, the diamond logo is as impressive now as it was then. And it's an unusual start to the story, plunging us into medieval England with no sign of the Doctor or unit for the first 6 minutes. As well as being the first proper historical storyline in many years, it's also the first aliens interfering in Earth's history story since the Time Meddler. And you can see why the show brought back the idea. The interplay between Lynx and the medieval characters is a joy to watch, and throwing the Doctor and Sarah Jane into the mix makes it even better. Elisabeth Sladen makes her debut here as Sarah Jane Smith, and she makes a strong impression, just feisty enough without being annoying. It's a definite contrast to Jo Grant, and it's good that it takes her 3 whole episodes before she finally starts to trust the Doctor, which feels a lot more natural than most companion introductions. Kevin Lindsay is excellent as the Centauran Lynx, managing to give a strong performance even under all that makeup. David Dacre as Iron Gron is another memorable villain, taking every opportunity to chew the scenery. Overall, a highly enjoyable romp, with great writing and acting, an excellent start to the new season. 9. The first episode of this is definitely the best, with the Doctor and Sarah wandering around a deserted London after it's already been invaded. It feels like an updated version of Dalek Invasion of Earth, with deserted streets, gangs of looters, and trigger-happy soldiers. Once they meet up with Unit, it all becomes a lot cosier. But there are still plenty of surprises. The end of episode 3 is one of the best cliffhangers in Doctor Who history, as Sarah is told that she's on a spaceship, and she's been on it for 3 months. It's a shame episode 4 didn't keep up the pretense. It would have been interesting if they'd given Jon Pertwee the week off, and just explored Sarah coming to terms with her life on the spaceship. That's certainly something they might have done in the new series. It's also a very good conspiracy story, as almost the entire guest cast turns out to be part of the conspiracy. The most surprising of these is of course Mike Yates, and despite Richard Franklin not being the greatest actor, it's still very powerful to see such a long-standing character joining up with the villains, especially when he turns a gun on the Brigadier and Benton. Unfortunately, you can't ignore the fact that a lot of the story revolves around the dinosaurs, and the effects just don't work. While in The Green Death some of the visuals looked okay, here they are all just terrible, and it really spoils a lot of scenes. This is a good episode for Elisabeth Sladen though. As Sarah Jane, she really drives the plot forward in her determination to figure out what's going on, and you can see why her character has become so beloved and enduring. This is also the story that introduces the Who-mobile, which is nowhere near as good as Bessie, and seems rather self-indulgent. The Doctor doesn't even use it for the big chase scene in episode 5. He just hops in a jeep instead. Overall, the visuals really let down the story, but apart from that, the story is rather stretched out with rather a lot of running around, and it could easily have been 2 episodes shorter. I'll give it a 6. So we've reached the part of the season where it's become traditional to have another bad Dalek story. And this one is particularly bad as the Daleks themselves are barely in it. There is the one good idea that the Daleks' guns don't work, and they have to cooperate with the humans in order to escape the planet. But it only takes them about 10 minutes to make new weapons, so sadly that idea doesn't really go anywhere. Mostly the story is a remake of Colony in Space, with a small group of humans on a desert planet, inhabited by a primitive alien race that used to be an advanced civilization. This time around, the grunting tribesmen are also very religious, which feels a bit racist. We also have the long sequence of the Doctor making his way through the Exelon City and solving incredibly easy puzzles, which is just extremely tedious, and has possibly the worst cliffhanger of all time. It's just a picture of a tiled floor. The whole production feels a lot more like a kids' show than usual, and you can't help but feel that Terry Nation's writing might be to blame. Especially bad is his treatment of Sarah. After 2 episodes establishing her as a strong independent character, here she becomes a generic female companion, screaming her head off at anything remotely scary, and shouting for the Doctor at all times, which feels like a massive step back. She does do better in later episodes, but only compared to Jill Tarrant, who is an even more useless female character. On the plus side, the character of Belial is well realised, with an impressive glowing costume and a sympathetic performance from Arnold Yarrow. And he's still alive at the age of 103, so maybe Belial could return someday. Overall, a rather dull story that wastes the Daleks. 4. After The Curse of Peladon was so good, it's hard to see why the sequel doesn't measure up. It's the same writer and director, same sets and costumes, but with an almost entirely different cast, and 2 more episodes. It all feels rather unnecessary, and the story is stretched out much too far. Instead of King Peladon and his elderly advisor Hepesh, we now have Queen Thalira and her elderly advisor Ortron, which makes very little difference. The Queen is just as useless as her father was, and Ortron is just as much a religious nut as Hepesh was, although, to be fair, not quite as evil. The main difference is that a mine has now magically opened up underneath the Citadel, and half the cast are now Boshy miners, who keep going on strike, which would have been quite topical at the time. Unfortunately, they're all given identical wigs and costumes, so their performances kind of blend together. The Ice Warriors are back, and the twist from last time that they were no longer evil has now been reversed, so they're back to just being plain old villainous again. To be fair, their appearance does liven up the story, and episode 4 is definitely the best. Alan Banyan as the Ice Lord Azaxir does a fine job as the main villain. He's played Ice Warriors before, but this is definitely his most memorable performance. Donald G as Eckersley is the other main villain, and he underplays his part nicely, coming across as just slightly unlikable, until the final episode where he's allowed to go a bit more over the top. Nina Thomas as Thalira is certainly very pretty, but not that impressive an actor. At least Sarah Jane is back to being more of an independent woman, at least until the final scene, where she lets the Doctor drag her into the TARDIS by her ear. So much for women's lib. Overall, it's an unnecessary and overlong sequel. 2. It's Jon Pertwee's final story, and it starts very strongly, with the first episode slowly building up the mystery, and then a long action sequence in episode 2, featuring everything from speedboats to helicopters. It's a bit self-indulgent, but very exciting all the same, and certainly a big improvement on the last story, when they were stuck in the studio for 6 episodes. Unfortunately, when they go to Metabilis 3, it all goes a bit pear-shaped, with unconvincing studio sets, and actors who can barely get their lines out. Fortunately, the final episode makes up for this. Jon Pertwee has some very emotional scenes, as he willingly goes to his death, and the Great One makes for an impressive final villain, much better than the spiders seen throughout the rest of the story. So the conclusion is certainly strong enough to make up for the middle. Of the cast, John Dirth as Lupton finally gets a chance to be on screen, after playing the voice of Boss in The Green Death, Stevens, and he makes for a fine antagonist once again. John Kane as Tommy is also impressive, and gives a very touching performance as a young man with learning difficulties, who overcomes them using the power of the crystal. I particularly like the bit where Sarah says, "You're just like everyone else now," and Tommy says, "I sincerely hope not," which has to be one of the best lines in Doctor Who history. And Richard Franklin comes back as Mike Yates, who's a lot more convincing when he's out of uniform. Overall, it's a bit of a smorgasbord, but the good parts certainly outweigh the bad, and the lasting impression is certainly positive. 7. So the Pertwee era is finally over. He'll never be one of my favourite Doctors. I much prefer the funny, eccentric ones to the arrogant, haughty ones. The 6th, 9th and 12th Doctors very much fall in the same vein. So I expect I won't like the 15th one much either. But after watching them all back to back, I certainly appreciate Pertwee's performance a lot more now. He's been a solid leading man throughout, taking charge of every story, and always managing to build good relationships with his companions. He's been pretty solid all the way through. But in this season you can certainly see that the production team, who was so strong in season 7 and for many years afterwards, they're starting to run out of ideas, the stories aren't as strong as before, and some new blood is definitely needed. Fortunately, Robert Holmes and Philip Hinchcliffe are just around the corner. Well, thanks for watching, and I'll be back in a few weeks for my video on Tom Baker's first season. And next week I'll be right up to date with my predictions for the 60th anniversary. So subscribe if you don't want to miss any of that, and I'll see you next time.